Okay, my name is Farhan Frank. Like on Frank MySQL, I'm known as Frank Mash, but you can call me whatever. My presentation is just like basically not like I just prepared like last 10 minutes, but I think it covered like something very important and something that generally is neglected within MySQL. I mean, there's like a lot of help you can get from in scalability and performance tuning, but this is after like the disaster happens, and not just a disaster, but kind of like a system-wide disaster.
The disaster.
Yeah, the disaster that's going to cost you potentially your job or
Your business.
Yes, exactly. The moment you recover from a disaster like that, you can like, lay out your demands and be like, if you want to be.
And I gave you that advice too, did I specifically give you that advice? This is the time we asked you, right?
Exactly. Just a little bit about what this whole case study is about, but we are like Photolog. Probably you may not have ever heard of it, but we are one of the top 20 destinations online traffic-wise. We get a lot of traffic, like 160 plus million page views a day, more than 700,000 photos a day, and we have a unique rule where one person can only upload just one photo a day. And we have 10.5 million members, we are going really fast, and it's just crazy. Before I start, I want to ask you whether what's the worst disaster do you see happening within your ES run?
World War III.
Well, okay, a little bit less than that, but still like of a big magnitude.
Nuclear attack just on New York.
Nuclear attack on Gateway. Or just have your customers try to data like credit card numbers on the internet. Using the whole thing on the internet. That's probably about as bad.
Yeah. I mean, this is almost as bad, but it's bad enough to wipe the company out. This the one that So what happened to us? Honestly, we never ever imagined it happening. We, at the worst case, we were prepared for one section to go down, one cluster to go down, multiple clusters to go down. We were not prepared for everything to just shut down, and not because of power, which we would hope that, we wish that instead of what happened to us, it would have just been a power strike or something, because we would have been able to recover from it. If you haven't really if you haven't really thought of the worst thing that can happen, then chances are when that will happen, it will hit you with a surprise. And when it hits you with a surprise, you have you can only function to half of your extent. You can't like fully function. DB. When I joined Photolog, one of my main things was to convert everything to DB, and I actually believe that you cannot use MySum in enterprise in the same. You shouldn't use in the same line unless you are using MySum for logging that Jeremy and Ronald have been saying.
Makes you say that. Why? A little bit of why.
Why? Yeah. Well, if you have MySum, then you can have unannounced recovery for 5-6 hours. We have cases where some of our MySum tables, which are heavily partitioned again and again, but they have grown to like 80 gigs. So one table is 80 gig, but one database is like 700 gigs in MySum. And so any small problem with reboot, with any losing connection, all our MySum data will obviously get crashed. We have to like run repairs, and it would be just horrible because it would be unannounced. So it's like suddenly we are putting messages up, and so the best thing was to sorry, I forgot to plug my power. Okay. So one of the things was let's move to DB. So at least we don't have the embarrassing situation where every other day MySum is crashing. When I joined, MySum was crashing every week at least once on one of the database servers, which would make our whole part basically offline. And so main idea was like, let's use DB. We would have faster recovery time. And other reason was that we simply cannot get scalability in OLAP environments with MySum. We need scalability where we think MySum maxes out. So we, even for just read environments, we need much faster response times. We need our disks to be really always free, because unfortunately we use auto-increment table logs and stuff. Okay, so InnoDB doesn't normally crash. And the main reason we did this was to let's move to InnoDB. We would have much better experience for users. We won't have unannounced downtimes. And it worked great. For a year, every time we would have problem, our MySum tables are appearing, InnoDB is back online within minutes, and we are happy campers. But when it does, beyond, and I'm not talking about where it can just recover itself. When InnoDB does, this is my feeling. It's honestly, it's hell. And I have never experienced this too. This was my first time experiencing this hell. Again, because we did not foresee.
Have you told folks a little bit about where you work and the type of environment and website it is?
Yeah, it's like we have insanely high traffic, insanely high performance requirements. But the good thing is, when I joined, we were at 3 million members last year. Now we are at 10 million. And when I joined, there was like insane performance problems. But right now, we have gone from 3.5 million to 10 million members. Went from 40 million page views a day to 140 million page views a day. And we haven't added one single database search yet. So we have achieved everything from...
And they gave you a raise, right?
Huh?
They gave you a raise?
You get the t-shirt along.
I think the t-shirts are Canada. So, when this happened, I actually, for me it was like really big. Not as big as 9/11, but it was professional 9/11 for me. So I actually want to have some t-shirts that just say 7-5 never fail. So what happened was, let me start off by saying the single most expensive piece of equipment that we have, and we have invested more than I think 20% of the money we ever raised, is our SAM. This is the equipment on which, this is financial grade strength SAM. I wouldn't say the name just to keep the company out because it's going to get dirty later on. But it's a financial grade strength SAM. It's like wonderful. It's supposed to never fail. This is what financial systems use, institutions use, and there is we have literally one thing we were sure of, that everything can happen, our SAM would not fail. And it actually didn't fail, but it's interesting one. So one day, one of our disks fails in SAM. What happens is, as soon as we have RAID 5 configuration, as soon as the disk fails, it immediately flushes all its data down to SAM, and it's located on a totally different magazine. 4 disks make up one magazine. The problem is, everything runs smooth, so we don't even notice drives failing and stuff like that. The problem is when you come in and you have to replace actually one of the drives, you have to flush the remaining 3 drives that are in the magazine to the system. So what was supposed to be a very routine maintenance, we called our SAN provider. They came. In that time, we had another drive fail. So now there are 2 magazines with 2 failed drives. And our SAN people, they just wanted to get done with, this is why this is. They just wanted to get done with the operation, maintenance, so they were like, hey, I don't want to stay here an hour, let's run both in parallel.
maintained by the hour though, so it actually wasn't greedy until it was.
Yeah, exactly. But one or the other, yeah.
If they were greedy, they would have waited forever.
Exactly.
They were still billing the hour.
Yeah, exactly. He's right actually. We have like minimum time, so it's like even if 15 minutes, we are liable for the whole. It's a mixture of greed and laziness, and trying to sabotage us. So the guy comes, he's like, okay, we don't know, we just know the maintenance is going on. He comes, he starts replacing the first magazine. So now we have 3 drives that are flushing all its data down to disk. This is at our peak time. This is 9 p.m. Eastern, this is happening. He starts flushing it. While that's happening, he's like, oh, why would I wait for this to finish? Let me start the other one. He starts flushing the next 3 drives. So now we have 6 drives in a very, very active environment. Get this.
How many magazines total do you have?
How many?
How many magazines total do you have?
Oh, I don't know exact number, but I can say it's a 60 terabyte SAN. So it's like 750 gig drive each.
So what you're describing is because of the 2 disk failures, you now have 2 separate magazines.
Yes, 2 separate magazines that we need to replace drives in 2 separate magazines. But in order to do that, we need to flush the remaining 3 drives per magazine, so we can replace the drive in that, and that magazine can then be used.
So is your total magazine count, say, more than 10? Okay. So ideally then, what you're describing right now shouldn't be a big deal?
Yeah, no, it shouldn't.
Okay.
Theoretically speaking, our SAN people should be able to replace 10 drives at once.
Okay.
I mean, in one drive in half of SAN at once. So half of the magazine, they should be able to do it. It should not be a problem.
Right.
And that's why he did this. I'll tell you why, what they told us later. But so the guy does this, and while he's doing it, he doesn't know what's going on. We, at our office, we are suddenly seeing, well, first thing I saw was MySQL using like almost like 100% of CPU, and then going down to like 97%, going down to 3%, 97%, 3%, and I'm like, I'm really getting confused. What's happening? Yeah, and as I'm doing that, I get a call from my boss, and he's like, oh my God. What happened? I'm getting email after email from our SAN monitoring system. Basically, when like 5 minutes later, when we kept looking at the emails, 120 miles from our databases like disappeared. Running active, everything, our bin logs are also on SAN, so this will just give you like backup also. It's okay, we have learned. So 120 mounts just disappeared. We have never seen anything like this, so we are like, of course, freaking out. Like, this is the only SAN that is running. What do we do? And actually, I'm not exaggerating, but my boss's words were that that's it. We are done. He told the board of management that we may never recover from this. Because just, at this time, when we don't know what actually has happened to MySQL, where the mounts went, what we're looking into. So a total of 1 terabyte of InnoDB and MySum data hit. 700 gig was alone InnoDB. 300 gig of data that we had backup, but it was on the SAN, and it was the area that got hit hard because SAN put itself in preserve mode, started rejecting all writes. So we had like what I call like a semantic corruption, where totally MySQL doesn't know what has gone into it, and whatever is in there wouldn't make sense to when MySQL is reading it back. So 300 gigs of data, we could not fall back to backup, basically. We had to recover from whatever is in the crashed files somehow. And we must, because, otherwise it's users and us.
Users supposed to be.
Yeah. So, I will, Okay, I'm going to jump a little bit, but then I'm going to come back, and I will leave this for later for my dear friends there also to talk about these things. But there's basically a lot of things, whether you should use SAN or not use SAN, single disk. It's really expensive. As I said, it's the most expensive piece of equipment we have. But the bottom line we got out of this was just never, ever, ever trust your SAN provider.
Don't trust anything.
If they say it's routine maintenance, you should be scared shitless. Like, oh my God. I told my boss after this, I'm like, I don't care how, what guarantees they give us, but if you want my opinion, I am not comfortable going forward that even a drive is in place because of this, because we were like, how can this even happen? So we called the SAN people and we are like, okay, would you mind explaining to us what happened? And they're like, it's a bug.
Wrong answer.
They're like, it's a bug. And now, of course, we are going like, how can it be a bug? There is something wrong with this.
How long have they known about that bug?
Huh?
How long have they known about that bug?
I'll get to that. And they're like, if this is a bug, like, tell us more. And they're like, oh, the thing is that we actually have known about the bug for more than 2 years. We just didn't think that it would actually hit someone. And at that time, you're like, and why do you think it hit us?
You're like, do you think I might hit you right now?
Sorry, what?
Do you think I might hit you right now?
It's like, it just like basically what happened is that we just started flushing 2 drives at once. And we're like, so by 2 drives, you mean you were flushing 6 drives at once? And they're like, yep. And they're like, we just, we do this all the time on financial institutions. But it turns out that they had never seen a SAN so busy. So they attributed it to bug, plus the SAN being extensively busy. And they said that that's what caused it. And wouldn't take liability and stuff, but they were very apologetic and everything. But what it did to us is, actually when this is all happening, we call the people who are doing maintenance. And we are like, what the hell are you doing? And they're like, what happened? And we are like, dude, all the mounts are gone. And then they go and check and they're like, oh my God. Like, they brought everything back in like half an hour. But from that point on, all my sum tables come back online, no problem. now I'm feeling like, like really an idiot because all DB tables are like refusing to, even MySQL is even refusing to stay online for like 1 second. It's not, yeah, it's starting, it's restarting.
Hey, Farhan, you should tell them what version you're running. True. True. Because this is important.
Yeah, MySQL 4.1.11 to 4.1. And other than this, it works for us.
Other than the company catastrophic failure.
Exactly. So,
Were your entity logs and your separate amounts?
yeah, we did. We were smart enough for it.
That was probably a downfall.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the thing is that actually, a lot, I'll go into it. One of the main, we have so we have 4 clusters. We have user cluster, we have guest book cluster, we have photos cluster, we have friend favorite cluster, like clusters of servers, not MySQL cluster. Our main database that we were really worried about, the user cluster, that came back, the recovery, InnoDB recovery time on that without turning on the forced recovery mode with 1.5 gig and log size was 2 hours 30 minutes. So it was like a really long recovery time. But our guest book cluster, which, as I will get to in just a second, we had optimized InnoDB because of the premise given to us that SAN is always there. Your home may not be there, SAN is going to be there. And so what I had done as part of the optimizations we had done to InnoDB, which were quote unquote controversial and stuff, but part of the things we had done was we were changing schemas of our tables so that they give us faster read than MySum, and and still keep the disks busy. So basically, using DB to have most of our working data set in memory, and changing keys so it touches memory, it never actually touches the disk. So the drawback for that was that DB's data page fill factor drops down if you are using kind of like a foreign key as a primary key. Your data page fill factor will drop from 15, 16 to as bad as half. So you may have data pages that are only half filled and before DB counts. The disadvantage is that at any one time you have way more data pages open than you would like if it's auto increment as a key. And because of that, the corruption, we couldn't say that, okay, records 2 million plus are corrupt, or this is the area. It was all over the corruption. What we did was we started doing DB force recovery 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. At 6 it won't come back on, and that's when we got really worried. And at that time we had made the decision that okay, for every other database, what would be better is to fall back to backups immediately and keep track of what has happened, and then set up things to merge data for that day into the production databases. We started doing that. Overnight, by morning, after 14 hours of downtime, we had almost 80% of the site back up. The remaining 20% was the real challenge for us then. That what did we do? And we set up I wrote scripts for row by row recovery and stuff like that, trying to see whether we can jump over the corrupt data pages and retrieve it. Mostly we were able to, in 7 days, we were 95% back. This is 7 days. And this included, the first day this happened, this included after a whole day of work, almost 40 plus hours of, after working all day, this happened at 10 p.m., 40 hours from that, and I'm still working, and I'm awake. And the reason I went to bed was, on my test server, I actually ran a command, and I was like, oops, I wasn't supposed to run this. And I was like, this is the time that I'm actually better off going to sleep. But, for the last part, what happened with us was the recovery of the severely corrupt data showed very amazing, interesting information about DB. So one of the things we couldn't do is, was we couldn't use select asterisk from table because the data dictionary part is corrupt. We can specify select all the column names and hit data directly. We found out, this is after I had done 80% restoration from corrupt data, we found out that the indexes are lying to us. So we would say select max identifier, it would give us an identifier, but when I would query it based on a foreign key, it would give us a much higher identifier. And when I would actually ask the table, hey, do you have this identifier by making an explicit call, it would say no. It's I'm serious. It's the weirdest thing. I actually have the whole thing logged. And I like it. This is, by the way, 3 weeks into it. We have now gotten 3 weeks into it. I had done 80% of recovery. The problem is that if you hit a corrupt record in a DB, you're going to lose 4 seconds because DB is going to restart itself. So if, I was trying to retrieve 74 million around total guestbook records. And even if we hit 1 million crash records, that's 4 million seconds to lose. So that's an insane amount of time that's just going to go into it. Then once I was almost done with this recovery and we were ready to just finish the project, and we found out that, oh my God, this is completely lying to us. Then we changed our algorithms and we did something interesting. We stopped trusting the primary key and we wrote retrieval programs that would retrieve based on foreign key. It gave us two benefits. One, the retrieval sped up like 12 times. Like it was so fast. Like second, we were able to retrieve 99.5% of data that was in there and not like in the corrupt page.
Is that because they want the corruption to the force to restart?
Apparently the corruption, no, yeah. If we would hit a, if we would try to retrieve based on primary key, it would restart. It would say, oh, this record is corrupt, it's going to restart. When we tried to do it based on foreign key, apparently the foreign key databases did not have, that dictionary didn't get hit, and we were able to retrieve even the records that were, that InnoDB was saying it doesn't have, and it was, so we were able to retrieve all those by referencing foreign key.
Is that luck or by design?
I don't know. Conceptually, the speeding up thing I thought made a lot of sense because I'm making one call and instead of retrieving 10, instead of retrieving just one record, I'm actually retrieving the whole set for it.
I was just wondering if it was because the corruption was in the secondary index page, or the data pages and not the secondary index
Probably. Yeah.
extents.
Yes, that's what I thought, something that it's
We're using a fully covering index that was able to use just the secondary index pages in order to get the information out.
Yeah. Not the covering index, but just using the foreign key. Like simple call by so we had
Well, the reason I say that is because the secondary index actually contains the primary key.
Yeah.
And so if the secondary index extents were not corrupted, you could get a list of non-corrupted primary keys only from the secondary index. But you have to specify every single value in the secondary index in order to finally make it to the primary key, which is stored last in the secondary index of records.
What occurs to me is it's possible that you were crashing the server by asking for a primary key that didn't exist.
Okay, so what was happening is, let's suppose our maximum number that we expected to be in the database is like 7 million.
Yeah.
So if we are going 7.1 million, it would crash. If we are going 8 million, it won't crash. So after 8 million, we can keep asking that nothing exists, but it won't crash. However, immediately after where we expected the maximum identifier to be, we had almost 200,000 records range that we could not get to.
The reason is because the root nodes have pointers to them to data pages that were at that point corrupt. And so you'd get a null pointer, essentially. You'd be pointing to an area on disk or in memory that doesn't exist. But it thinks it exists because the root node says it exists, but the corruption happened at the database level.
It seems like this should actually be interesting to add a new node to InnoDB. Basically said don't trust the user correct. Just log a warning to say the page was corrupt and go on. Pretend there were no rows there.
Yeah.
That way you don't have to suffer the restart penalty at least.
I actually did not know that InnoDB is so sensitive to this thing. Yeah, exactly. So if we have something like that, it would have been, not only it would have saved a lot of time, but also it would have helped identify, okay, what exactly, which area is wrong, rather than just pointers.
So I was just going to say, just to keep everything kind of on time, because I know we've got other things going, what was the solution in the end?
Oh, but basically, solution was we were able to recover, we were able to get back to business. I ended up getting happy. But the main thing is that I want to leave you all with questions that, Ronald has spent quite some time about giving us good information about backups. But one thing is, if your backup is just replication only, you have no backup. I mean, this is me. And if you even trust it, it's useless. If you use SAN, you need to have SAN replicated to another SAN. And they have licenses and you can do a replication. That's just like the DRBD kind of thing, but just for SAN. However, that even may not help you with this kind of incident. Yes, please.
So you're saying if you do SAN, you have a very expensive SAN machine,
Yeah, that's what I think. At least, if you're going to depend on your SAN,
That will not be mistaken. That's absolutely right. And what's worse is if you use the SAN replication, it's not going to respect NODB.
exactly. It's still going to be very
If you
sensitive.
have to recover to your backup SAN, NODB might actually be completely corrupted.
Yep. The other thing is, like, normally people aren't prepared for system-wide crashes. When the crash happened, Ronald here knows that once you make the decision, okay, let's restore from backup, it took us 14 hours from that point to actually restore it. Why? We didn't have uncompressed backup. We have backup that's extremely compressed the hell out of, like, and now we are sitting there and like waiting for like these like couple hundred gigs of files and all of our servers like trying to do, and then the amount involved in transferring. Now, one of the things, by the way, I want to say, if you ever compress your backup, do not compress it with an absolute path to extract. So if you do that, first of all, you would have to wake up your system administrator and tell him, hey, I need like 500 gig mount on this like immediately, because the place where it's forcefully going to write just only has 20 gigs. And so he would have to give you the space, and then you would have to extract it on one place and then copy 500 gigs back to the directory where you intended it. So what I bounced ideas with Ronald, and one of the things that we in those days came up with was that you really, in case you want to be prepared for a system-wide crash, you need to have uncompressed backup available for you, and preferably in a mountable state. So all you can do is bring new mount and just mount it. That's it. You're restored from backup. But if you depend on unzipping and then it's gonna. Oh, by the way, there's an option. Is it useful? Your backup. That's very important. So what we were doing before keeping backups on the same SAN was transferring everything that's happening in New York to Sacramento on a different SAN. The problem was, if we ever had disaster like this, we would have had to fly someone to Sacramento to ship the SAN back, and when it comes back, then we would figure out what to do.
You didn't actually have a whole disaster recovery? You couldn't have just brought the service back up over?
Yeah, no, it's not data center. It's not like, we cannot switch.
It's not geographically redundant.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Okay.
You're not Google, I mean.
So what we did was we canceled our contract there. We were like, send our SAN back.
Save yourself some money.
One is, are you allowed to consider suing? Did you have any grounds to sue?
I preferably wanted to. I went to my
Is there such a thing as doing a dry run backups in this industry?
like,
Yes.
They call them fire drills.
Recovery?
Fire drills. You know, when your kids learn, like, this is the exit, and when the fire has to leave, you pretend, you practice. Your system operator should be doing that, like, monthly. Just pretend you've got an outage. Just restore the backup as a restorable. You know, bring the service up. and
Exactly.
test
When
it
you get
hard.
a new box, it's not, and start on a new box, the whole thing from scratch.
It sounds like a formality, but it's a really good idea.
Otherwise, you're dying on fire.
Yeah, you find out the hard way.
Yeah, you generally start doing those after that first big disaster.
Exactly, you learn from pain.
Well, I think what Frank's saying is learn from Frank instead of.
So I'm going to hurry up and finish it, but some very just random points. But I think this is how you create a bigger problem in case of a disaster. You optimize, DB, and then instead of having this much crash, you end up with this big. Oh, this is how you actually ask them to shoot you in the head. If you use max word lag, like really big, that is gonna get you. If you use logs unsafe for bill log, you may just better quit your job. If you use max 30 pages per second, okay, I don't know exactly what the relation of that would be, but I think that that would actually make, this is just my third one is totally my, but I think it was actually
What was your setting?
45.
But is that in combination with the other things that you did?
Yeah.
That in combination?
Oh, I actually, hold on. I did not use InnoDB log unsafe for bin log, and I never will. So just so we're clear. I'm just saying that this would make it much worse if you have, because I mean you're going to have a lot of the logs, all the logs that are required would not really hold up. I mean, it's not like aggressive locking; it's very relaxed locking, from what I understand. Oh, and the other thing is, have just one DBA. Don't keep a single backup of, if you just have one person, he can only work like X number of hours, and then that's it. He's got it. Funny thing is, I told my wife, I'm like, this is after 40 whatever hours. I'm like, honey, I gotta go to bed. Can you wake me up in like 3 hours? Okay, I go to bed. I wake up next morning.
You need sleep.
So those factors can happen too.
But this is the benefit of being married. Your wife actually doesn't push you before your job. Yeah. That's like I benefit.
The other thing is, if you keep backups, but you don't have periodic backups, your backups are useless, almost. Because chances are that your last day backup is going to be corrupt or something will happen. You need to have at least weekly, monthly backups,
Daily.
Well, you have to do an assessment and say, what is it that you need? How long can you recover? You go to your boss and you say, what's the worst case scenario? They're going to come back and say, there's no tolerance for anything. You have to be, up to the 15 minutes. But then you have to say, no, really, what's reality?
You're very right. Yeah, I actually do get opposite. It's like, oh, it's just comments. Makes my job easier, by the way. I don't mind. Okay, and the other thing is, you have to have a plan of what's going to be involved in restoring everything from backup. Once your whole everything is down, not just one part of the system. Compressed, uncompressed, we talked about. Forced recovery is how you would actually try to recover, set it to 1, 2, 3, and up to 6. And on MySQL manual, it explains what exactly it does. As a last resort, you gotta write row by row recovery. May not be able to use asterisk, may not be even able to use primary keys. Foreign key based retrieval was much faster and much more reliable for artists. And you lose some time there.
I would only add to that if it's the data segment, if it's the data extensive or corrupt, the secondary index, the foreign keys will be more reliable and faster. However, theoretically, it is possible that the corruption could occur in an extent that contains secondary indexes, in which case it would be the opposite.
Yeah, the general thing I got out of that was that
don't trust
one method, and you may want to try like different ways to get the same answer.
Well, assuming your data pages were okay, couldn't you just do a full table scan, spool out all of your
No.
data? Drop the table. And
one problem with that approach is this. So if that's how I started out, because this was my first crash, first mid crash of this result. I started out doing the general thing that, okay, let's do table scan, let's see where it, and then skip 1,000 records. The problem doing that on table with 70 million records or so is that it's going to take, I don't know why, but it's going to take 4 hours almost to get to the point where it starts retrieving, let's say. It would start retrieving, let's say it crashed out at 50 million. Then now you want to skip, let's say, 1 million and start from 51 million onwards. It is going to take almost the same amount of time, like 4 hours.
Well, are you using a where clause or using a limit clause?
No, where clause would be better to just retrieve like this foreign key, but no where clause, just limit.
And not handler.
Yeah.
You didn't do the
Why
handler
wouldn't it
over
actually count it? That's what I was. I was going to ask, like, why wouldn't, if I say select asterisk from this table and say where, not where, select from user where, select from table, limit,
1 million.
yeah, exactly. So if I do that, it seems like it spends a lot of time trying to get.
Yeah, well, it has to do with.
It'll do a full table.
Yeah, so it won't remember
The
it.
first million records.
Yeah.
Or million tags.
So the problem, I tried doing that 3 times, I wasted 12 hours, and I did not.
I run the handler API, or is that not in
If
4.1?
if you are on 5.1, you could have done the port,
Yeah.
No, but even in 4.1, isn't the handler API in there?
But it's not going to help you in that case because it's going to do the same thing as a select star with. Basically with InnoDB, if you do a full table scan, it's not a sequential scan through the data file. It's actually a walk through the index tree. So if the index tree is corrupt and that structure is
all the
corrupt,
table drops on index?
but there's always a primary index.
What?
InnoDB is indexed
Oh,
with
is there?
a primary key. So
Even if you drop, you can't drop.
there's always a primary key.
And
Even if you don't.
There's a row, I mean.
There's a primary key inside it. So if you don't create a primary key, you get an auto-incrementing hidden field that acts as a primary key. Because any walk through the structure will walk through the structure rather than just walking block by block.
So when are you going to migrate back everything on my access?
no, we are actually doing the last port over to InnoDB, and hopefully, it won't happen again. But we are like now much better about a lot of things. And this is like because this again, as a lot of systems were, this system was just handled by Linux system administrators. There's so much on this production environment that we just cannot move. But last thing I would like to end it with is, once you will be in forced recovery mode, you won't be able to create dump table into an InnoDB table. So at that time too, because what you would have to do is select from InnoDB table, but populate a MySum table. Then once the whole process is done, you need to convert that.
alter table.
If you do alter table, then you would probably need to do it 2 times to really get a compact table space. Otherwise, select and insert. But that's about it, and I hope you learned something.
This was the first time you used InnoDB that crashed like this?
Oh,
This bad?
yeah, I've never used any database that would crash like this. So.
No, I'm just saying the first time that you moved to InnoDB, that you really suddenly saw something wrong. This was your experience?
We have crashes, like normal crashes, like every other month and stuff, but it's all like recovers and stuff like that. Never something that we would like freak out. But this was the freaking out part.
One final thing, is there anything about this that would have been different if you were on 5.0 or 5.1? That you know of, or that my skull said?
That I know of, from what I see, 5.0 might have helped in quicker recovery, but as far as what I see, the damage done, I don't think it, because again, this is just sand just missing something.
Right.
So I don't think the disaster would be any low, but I would hope that the recovery time is faster.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I know of specific to InnoDB would be that the row format is much more compact than 5.0, but that would just save, yeah, like you said, a little bit of the recovery time and unmarring and all that stuff.
It even helps to know what approach you're going to take when the disaster hits, because we, for instance, we really spent like first 3 hours went into, okay, what do we do now? Do we actually fall back? Do we try to recover this? What do we do? Then, once we got to the recovery point, okay, how do we recover? Do we recover like start scanning the tables and then skipping? Do we recover based on primary key, foreign key, and based on asterisk? And by the way, all our tables were mixed and match. So some won't work with asterisk, some won't work with specifying. So it's like a real mess. But I don't think that this is again kind of thing that if it happens, it happens. And it is, if it happens again, it's going to cause the same kind of havoc. I don't expect it to simplify life. But that said, if InnoDB, I think there's a lot of room for even scripts to be available to do this recovery. At that point, I was a person that was like in insane pressure. I had no one from my company who could like jump in and start doing it. But at that time, that is not the time to experiment. Okay, which kind of recovery program is going to work? And when you're getting calls every 3 hours, okay, what's the situation, how do we load? That's not the time to, and I was at that time actually going out looking for consultants or scripts or anything that would just be available so I can just, start doing it, but
I think a fair point actually is if you had used InnoDB flush log at TRX equals 1 and you had the data and the logs on the same volume, you likely wouldn't have experienced most of those issues.
yeah, we didn't have one, and we had like, on some,
The issue is that the data was missing that was theoretically committed.
Yeah, because the SAN said it committed.
exactly, yeah.
So
Because you weren't actually asking the SAN to commit it.
Right, well, no, by setting it to 2, basically you're saying, InnoDB just trusts whatever the SAN
Yeah.
says it did, as soon as,
And
it
if
issues that.
the issue with trusting it then is if you do that sort of lazy write, the presumption, the only reason that should even work at all in a failure case is the presumption that you're writing to a single disk and that disk will write things sequentially, whether...
Right.
So at least if you lose something, you lose it up to that point. But if you're writing to 2 different mount points on a complicated SAN, you could lose any part of it. You could lose some data from before, some data from after.
And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, exactly. So then you end up in a situation where you're completely screwed and InnoDB doesn't know what to do.
Exactly. And the effect was that we couldn't tell our guest members that, hey, your comments on this day are missing. But we were able to say, hey, in last year, some of your comments from random days may just be gone. So, we got them that.
The question,
There's 2. Go ahead and then.
How long did it take you to recover?
Fully recover? A month.
and,
He doesn't recover.
the average end user, do they notice anything? How do you handle it?
Okay, this is very funny.
Relations-wise, how do you handle it? Did you
This-
say sorry?
This is very funny. So just like 2 days before this, we had launched, converted our entire 95% of our site from PHP to Java. As we did that, we have a community that's very, very passionate. They would go out and spread rumors that our CPO, like the main founder, is like 300 pounds just because he posts picture of his food or whatever. But what they do is they really get involved in it. And what happened is, when this happened, the side effect of that was that across like 10+ million members, the rumors that people started posting on each other's photo log was, hey, they are doing to make it for paid customers only. So we are free members. So they thought we are purposefully annoying them by taking off their thing and turning off features and playing with their comments.
Photo log differentiation.
So they loved it. So in photo log, by the way, I would say this, we are notorious for students of Chile and Brazil organizing strikes through photo log. So students from all schools communicate on photo log, hey, this day is going to be strike day, and then no one will go to school. And then school administrators come to photo log pages trying to figure out. So we had like very major PR issues where we had to actually tell them again and again and again. They actually took photos of me working like on this. They're like, let's pile up some Coke cans and we'll show this guy's been
You make it look worse than it is.
Exactly, absolutely. We tried everything, but the general thing was that, hey, you guys are going to do this. There was a massive call for strike across Footlog that we should not upload any photo or visit Footlog for like 3 days.
You said good.
Actually, my boss was, his words were almost like that. He's like, cool, I can use a day off.
So just some interesting things. So we started talking about backup and recovery, but we never got into graphic details. There are 2 things I want to raise. First of all, in your environment, you did do flush tables with read lock and took a snapshot, which is what we're talking about as one of the backup options. However, because of the purge log, InnoDB log files were still being written to, and that log and that flush, when it was restored, was corrupt. It wouldn't load. So the question is, is that an issue of 4.1 that's causing the problem? Or is it an issue of some other variables that are causing the problem? So that's one thing you don't know. So that combined with the fact that even if you have this architecture and you do a backup, you have to actually trial and do a recovery because you need to know whether your recovery actually works. Heike, the creator of InnoDB, actually has written a response saying you don't even need to do flush tables. You can just do a straight snapshot.
No.
Okay? And the thing is that there's conjecture that that's not actually valid. Because in this environment, it didn't even work with a flush.
No.
So about all these things that you do, you've got to make sure you want to have a backup. You know, you might plan for recovery, but in all reality, if you want to be disaster recovery aware, you have to really do it and see whether it's actually possible.
Yeah. And
That's very important.
That's very true. This is like, you know, we have, so when this all happened, part of the project was to restore all this reset replication, you know. And while we were, because binary logs were correct. So while we were going through, when we took the snapshot, we copied it over, and every time we do this and it goes fine. The only change we had done in the last replication reset and the new one was purge lag, max purge lag. And what we did was, when we took the snapshot, we took it and we now started up, and it is exhibiting the same behavior like everything. That actually caused such a major panic, because I called my boss and I'm like, oh my God, you know what? I think our user cluster is also corrupt, and it's a matter of time when someone will get records which are corrupt, and we will lose our user cluster as well. Because once this crash happened, 3 days later, there were tables crashing beyond recovery. So this wasn't just like some tables that came up fine, passed all my checks, they were crashing 3 days later for no other apparent reason. And one of the things was that, you know, out of all of this, out of all the, you know, I was so paranoid. I was like, you know, what we should do is block a major portion of our website preemptively for a day until I can check whether why the snapshot came out corrupt, because we were so used to it. So next day, the only hint I got from my, one of our essay was that, hey, I noticed timestamp changing. So next day when we took snapshot, we calculated checksum, checked the timestamp, moved it over to slaves. An hour later we checked the checksum with flush tables with read log still on. The checksum had changed. 1 hour, 30 minutes later we checked it, it had changed again. So almost 2 hours somewhere, we noticed, okay, now timestamps are not changing, checksums are not changing, now let's take the snapshot. So the third time we took the snapshot, took it down, and worked perfect. No corruption. So that's why I'm almost, you know, it would depend. And if you don't have max purge lag or one of these settings, then you can take copy and it would recover. But I think it will also depend on the key. So with auto increment key or a simple primary key, I don't expect it to be such a problem. But with a composite key as a primary key, I expect it to be. Because so many data frames are there. Yes, please.
So I guess the bottom line is don't trust any one thing, but just should use a multiple techniques to try to make sure that your recovery is complete and accurate.
Yeah, and then just know which plans are going to take you long and which ones are going to be totally unfruitful. As I said, when I was doing limit table scan and trying to retrieve, 3 times I tried, 4 hours each, 12 hours later, I have not recovered one more record. And that's like adding to the pressure because, you know, it's like, oh my God. And so the better way is to not even go that way. If you have a large table, if you have a small one, that should be fine.
In terms of the table scans, did you ever think about going into the source to manually do table scans so you could save the outputs and things?
Sorry, what?
Did you ever think about looking at the actual source and using the table scan functions from InnoDB manually, like write a C program?
No, we didn't. No, we didn't at that time. No. Because again, this is a time where it's like the most panic environment. I mean, we can imagine. And, we have PR crisis going on. People are like, you know, having strikes and about to kill each other.
You mentioned that you briefly were looking for other resources, you know, someone else you could call on to ask them questions. Did you find anybody?
No. No one. I mean, I tried everything that I could, other than waking up Jeremy Cole at midnight.
I didn't hear anything from you. What was that?
I was No, I couldn't find anyone immediately that I,
Have you found
that situation
Exactly.
And wasn't this on a Friday, right before we, I mean, yeah, it happened at 10 PM on a Friday.
it's a wonderful time for picnic.
Have you continued that search? Have you found any more since then?
No, we are not searching anymore. Now we know what would happen next time. So we have much better procedures and authorizations in place where we can like just proceed. We actually have, one step we have done is, we now have 500 gig mount available on each of our database servers. We have like uncompressed backup. We have done a lot of stuff, so we minimize the time. So now I think our full recovery from backup should be around like 2-3 hours or so.
And Frank is doing a session at disasterCampII called, remember at last camp when I said we now know what we're going to do
Yeah.
next time?
Don't trust that. There will be new things. Anything else?
I think you did mention, you just mentioned the point about periodical backups. I think it's important because you actually did restore data some data from an older backup. So it's important to realise, don't just rely that last night's backup is critical. Last night's backup should be on disk because 90% of your recovery will always be from that. That's my approach, and uncompressed. But you've got to realise that you may need other types of backups. But you take that also and make it off-site compressed. You might keep several versions of it.
So thank you for reminding me. What happened was one of the most famous photologgers is our founder. He has taken more than 7,000 photos of every single meal he has eaten. And you can go to his website and say, oh, this day he ate that, this day he did that.
How does that work with only uploading one photo a day?
He has a gold camera account, so you can.
Oh, you can pay to upload more than one a day.
6 is the limit. You can't do more than 6.
So it's 700,000 divided by 6?
And he has admin privileges.
Right, right, right.
But he is one of the most popular ones, and he belongs to our C#, and C# we lost data, we didn't have backup, and I was walking around in my living room telling my wife, I'm so fired, I'm so fired. Just because I didn't know how am I going to explain. I mean, my CTO understands, and technical people understand that backup is only good if you continue testing it. And if one of our backup files is missing, there's nothing that you can do. And what happened was I told my boss that unfortunately one of the major, which means everyone who ever commented on his photo log is missing. We just don't have any data, pretty much, because the one that we have is so corrupt we can't recover. The one, backup isn't there. The only option was to go search Google, copy, paste. So what we did was, luckily, I'm stressed out. I told them, communicated that, okay, we will never be able to do this, and I don't know what we will do, but I will do a best possible case recovery once I'm done with everything on C#. So 10 minutes later, I am on my test server and just running LS and checking what directories are. I find a backup copy that I took a week ago. You don't know how, it almost makes you cry. You see, oh my God. And that, just a periodic backup that, I've just thrown on my server and, never looked back. And what that allowed us to do is just do 7 days worth of thing. And out of that, we recovered 45%, so we didn't really, lose a lot. It's not to say that you should let your data get loose, but it's, business requirements. I was given the authorization that, we have to balance things, and unlike normal companies where people say, no, spend whatever you want, have everything, ours is work with what we give you. So, have to work within those. And it was an understanding that if we have a disaster, we would lose some. And it's because we are not in financials or any serious industry. We are serious. Anything else? Okay, thank you very much.